Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of A Piece of Cake with our very frightened brother, Abdurraheem Green, and myself, who's cool and calm and collected, Abdul Baker. So, Abdurraheem,
Yeah,
tell me, what is your fear?
bro, black people, man, you guys are scary. It's just, it's true, bro. It's true. Listen, I mean, let's start with that because, like we obviously, for you brothers and sisters, you're not in on it, but, we've already been exchanging a few things, and we were joking about I was joking about, the poster, and Abdul Haqq wanted it to be, the word fear to be in white. And I said, no, it should be in black because black people are scary. But I was saying it. I was saying it as a joke, but to be honest, it was only half a joke because the reality is that I know there's a lot of white people who are scared of black people in general, and I won't lie that black people do scare me sometimes, and a lot of it is to do with what I realized. But obviously, it's not. I think we've had a similar conversation before, yeah. And some of it is to do with just pure stereotyping, yeah. Some of it is to do with a very different way of behaving. Often, you come across people who are very loud and very animated, yeah. And like for a sort of English person who's modus operandi is cool as a cucumber, right? It can seem all very intimidating, yeah. I mean, I actually remember as a kid as well being like flipping terrified of motorbike gangs. So it's not like it's not like a race thing necessarily. But it is to do with stereotypes. It's to do with how you stereotype people. And if you think black people are, physically, which there may be something in that. There may be in the whole physicality. There's no doubt. Black people are, have a different physical demeanor. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I see a ripped black guy, and it's like, man, I ain't seen no white guy ripped like that ever in my life. Yeah, it's like we ain't, it's like, so there is that whole, thing. But I mean, the whole point of fear, what's all fear about? I mean, this is the whole thing. This interesting title, Fear. Don't leave home without it. Why did you want to discuss this, Abdul Haq? What on earth is this about? Because I'm curious, and you said, no, Abdurraheem, we're just going to explore this topic. So I was saying, like, no, I need some stuff, and he said, no, we're just going to talk. So what is it you want to talk about, bro? What is it you want to cover? What sort of idea, what's the whole theme going on here, bro?
No, thanks, Abdurraheem. Jazakallah khair. I think it's important. Yeah. I want to say in his absence, Jazakallah khair to Sheikh Abu Osama, because I listened to it last week concerning fear. And not all of it, but there were aspects that grabbed me where he mentioned something. He said, if you are with someone or you have a companion who fears nothing, stay away from that companion, because he's got no barriers, boundaries, or anything like that. I thought about that, and I thought someone who says they don't have any fear is either a liar or a fool. Okay, foolish have no boundaries. Okay, so I looked at it, and when he brought examples of the greatest of mankind, the Anbiya, and examples of their fear. So Dawood alayhi salam, when he was in his mihrab, we hear Allah when the two disputants came to him. And he was startled. He was afraid when he saw them in his mihrab. And I thought, we often wonder, why was he startled? And as was explained, he had for his guards angels, jinn, all of creation. So that was an impenetrable private place for Dawood. Yet two individuals, they were angels, we know, but they came in the form of humans, were able to penetrate. We hear other examples, like, for example, Musa alayhi salam, when he went to the burning bush, Allah spoke to him and told him, La takhaf. When he removed his hand, it was white, and before that, his cane was a snake. So we see that Anbiya.
He turned his back. He turned and fled and didn't look back. Didn't even glance backwards.
Exactly. That's Musa alayhi salam, who punched the eye of the angel.
Yeah, he was a tough guy. He was, subhanallah.
So now, when we're looking at that, I was looking, I thought, okay, you know what? we need to discuss fear, because our times for the fear of Allah, which we all know, and later on, if we don't do it in this episode, next up we can talk about what that looks like. I want to talk about this society which is saying don't be afraid of anything except what they tell you to be afraid of. Phobias, Islamophobia, we know about arachnophobia. They put
homophobia.
They put the state often puts phobias out there. Remember with the World War, remember with the nuclear war, about the Russians, about the Germans, how the Jews were denigrated. Now it's the Muslims have been denigrated. So who is exactly, who is it who's instilling that fear? And conversely, why are we trying to move around and be so tough that we don't need to fear anything? What is it that we're trying to avoid? What is it that we're trying to shut out and not have fearlessness? Because with no fear, if you don't have fear, you don't have conscientiousness. If you don't have fear, I think you cannot be righteous without fear. There's fearlessness in times, in situations where heroics are required, in battle, and things like this. And so, Abdurraheem, before I throw it back to you, and I'll come back to the thing with you now. This is the very good introduction that you gave. It's funny, isn't it, that the impression, the propaganda that was given against blackness and black people, colonially, during the slave trade, continues to perpetuate today. And we only have to look at one simple thing. Abdurraheem, people of your complexion are the most frightening people on this earth.
Absolutely. It's ridiculous.
The genocide that's been spread. You people are the most violent that we have known in history. Gone and conquered and destroyed and pillaged. Yet your propaganda's been very good and effective, because you flipped it and said, the black people, the brown people, they're barbarians. They need civilizing. They're the ones we're afraid of. They want our women. We need to be fearful of them. Yet it was you, not you personally, your ethnicities that went, spread diseases, killed, pillaged. And it's really strange, isn't it, that whiteness isn't the thing that's feared, but blackness is. Whiteness still symbolizes purity, everything that's fair and kind and soft and gentle. Yet it's whiteness that has done exactly what it's saying that blackness should be, we should be afraid of blackness for. And it's a sort of psychosis that's been there, and it's perpetuated even up to date.
I mean, I would totally agree with that. I think it's absurd, isn't it? It's absolutely absurd. You know, the things that Europeans have perpetuated, and the crimes that they have committed, and the atrocities, the things that they've done, whether it's, I mean, I think that the most horrific is, King Leopold and what happened in, the King of Belgium, and what he did in the Congo is just probably on the top list of the most disgusting, brutal, savage things. But the British are not free from it. The treatment of the Mau Mau, what they did.
Right.
But that brutality was not always necessarily, a racial thing. They treated the Boers pretty horrifically, and they were white. But you're right. Generally, there is that sort of level of brutality. It's just unimaginable. And you're absolutely right. I think that's just what's so, like almost so weird about it, is that the white people have perpetuated these horrific crimes against Africans, yet, it's like the white people are claiming they're afraid of them. Well, maybe they've got a reason, because maybe they think revenge is coming. Maybe that's a whole nother thing. Maybe there's maybe enmeshed in that is a deep fundamental guilt, and a knowledge that what goes around comes around. You can call it what you like, the law of reciprocality or karma or whatever they call it, but you give out evil, that evil is going to come back to you one day.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
I mean, so that there could be this sort of deep, this deep guilt, and this sort of, a fear that you're going to get your just desserts. And it's, and by the way, some people are not even shy of saying that. It's like,
you're right. There's a lot.
You invaded our countries. Why are you complaining about us invading yours now? Yeah.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think that there is a fragility. There's a white fear, and as you said, I think it's it's in the psyche that what has been done to others is going to be reciprocated. But what I would say, and wa alaikum salam, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, to our brothers and sisters who've joined us, Shireen, Bilal, Aziz, many of you have come on board, mashallah. What we need to look at, if that was the case, Abdurraheem, then white people wouldn't be able to move into Africa and live and engage and continue to trade. They wouldn't be able to move to the Americas. They won't be able to move anywhere, actually, even to the brown countries, the yellow countries, if you like, because of what they've perpetuated. But it's not innate in our nature, because had it been, we would never have been, our continent would never have been conquered. So when that the fear of savagery and everything like this was put there, I think, well, I know actually it's evidence in order to control, in order to conquer. And when we look at our society today, look at the Gulf War, the weapons of mass destruction, look at the fear mongering that continues to be done. Now, we're saying fear, don't leave home without it. I think one of the key things that we need to look at as well is ourselves. What do we fear? Is it a rational or irrational fear? And what should we be fearing? And how should we be fearing? So, for example, you'll hear stories. Everyone's ears pricks up when they hear stories about the jinn and all of this sort of stuff here, okay? But when we see the stories of the Anbiya, when we hear the stories of the righteous, and we see encounters and engagement with jinn and everything like this, we don't see fear. We see dealing with another aspect of creation based on knowledge, trusting Allah, and knowing that Allah is the one, the all-controlling, the all-powerful in these instances. And we hear some very good discussions. A young brother was asking me about, because he saw the video that I did, you and I did, where I talked about the jinn and when I was teaching that student. And I went on and told him about another occasion with a particular student of knowledge. You know him, I can't remember his name. Is it Abdurrahman from Leeds? He was he used to do Ruqya. You knew him. We used to go up to see him sometimes. I said, I can't remember his name. I remember sitting with him one day, and some of the brothers, I think Ilyas was there, and he told us about some of the stories of what his encounter. One of them saying that people would come to him and say, they've got jinn, can you remove them? And he did. He did the Ruqya, and he said, but brothers, the jinn always return to these individuals. And we said, why? He said, because as soon as they've had Ruqya, they go back to the sinfulness and the things that they were doing before. And so the jinn re-enter. But one of the stories that stuck with me, and Abdurraheem, I'm not sure if you were there, but remind me if you were, or we were in the same areas in Leeds. But I remember he told us a story of one of the jinn that he had a discussion with, and the other junior jinn, if you like, used to gather around this particular jinn. And that jinn had been there since the fire of London. And he had a discussion with him when he was doing Ruqya on a particular individual. Now, it was a fascinating story. But when I listened to this student of knowledge, absolutely no fear. When we used to sit with Sheikh, what's his name? For one of the Jordanian Mashaykh, okay, Muhammad Musa Nasser, rahimahullah. And he would tell us some of the stories of when he had to deal with things. No fear whatsoever. So the point is, what fear do we have? And should we have? And should we be inculcating? And what fears shouldn't we be having? And there are natural fears. Somebody may have arachnophobia. They're just scared of spiders. Okay. And we can't blame them and say, oh, you're being sinful or anything like this with regards to the fear. But when there are other areas of fear which are blameworthy, okay, cowardice, for example, we know Surah Anfal about the battlefield and not turning your back in and running from the battlefield unless it's a stratagem of war. That's another aspect that we need to look at. But when we are going out into this world now, us as Muslims, if we are not governing ourselves with fear of Allah, and that's being cultivated by our dhikr, our reading of the stories of the prophets, our reading of Quran and our reflection and everything, our pondering over the raqa'iq, the heart softeners, our pondering over our next destination. Abdurraheem, you and I used to give the lectures on the punishment in the grave. And you know that you could hear a pin drop when we used to give those discussions, because everyone listened attentively because they knew that was the next place of abode that we were going to. And the description of the punishment in the grave and the life in the grave is very, very descriptive. So my point here in saying fear, don't leave home without it. We're leaving home without it many times. Maybe women, the sisters are wearing makeup and beautifying themselves when they're going out and taking off the hijab or wearing a particular way. Maybe us men, we're going to somewhere where we know we shouldn't be frequenting or going to. So there's absolutely no fear when we're leaving the home. We have to leave home, not being fearful and, oh, what's going on around me, but we've got to have that cognizance, that fear, knowing that Allah is seeing everything, knowing that the protection of Allah can be removed from us if we are committing sins or intending to go and commit sins in that instance, and not be thinking of other fears. I don't want to get run over by a bus today. I don't want somebody to know, to expose me, or a scholar to speak against me. I don't want this sister to not be my friend. And we're moving out into society, our jobs, our schools, our colleges, universities, fearing these more mundane aspects, but not the epitome of fearing Allah, knowing that He's seeing, hearing, and can take us to task at any time, if not in this life, especially in the hereafter, for things that we're doing.
So, I mean, I think to going back to the issue of the jinn, I think one of the things that makes me think about is something, one of my favorite little phrases. Yeah. I think sometimes, there's a little phrase that encapsulates a lot of wisdom in it. And one of them is that people tend to be afraid of things they don't understand. So the less you understand about something, so it's the fear of the unknown is one of the biggest fears that we have, right? In fact, really, in reality, that's what fear is. Because if you think about what fear actually is, it's about something that you think is going to happen in the future, right?
Right.
Fear is it's totally a thing that's in the mind, right? So now that thing may or may not happen, right? But fear, in a sense, is not anything. It's not anything actually real. So it's that fear of the unknown. So you tend to be afraid of things that you don't understand. And I guess the more you understand it, not necessarily the less you'll be afraid of it, but you will know where to place that fear in the correct way. Yeah. So I think scholars, when they're dealing with jinn, because they understand the jinn, because they are people of knowledge and they understand these matters deeply, they're not afraid. Prophets are going to be even less afraid because it's not unseen for them in the way that it is for us. Yeah. They have a much higher, Allah has given them a much greater degree of perception of those things, right? So it's not quite as unknown to them as it is to us. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I think, is experience. Now, when I think about fear, when I think about fear, the thing I think about most about fear is my favorite, like probably my single favorite pastime, I used to say my hobby is mountain biking, right? Now, it's interesting that, and I'm sure this is true of so many things, but I'm just giving this as an example because that's from my life. Yeah. So just day before yesterday, I went into the woods where I knew there was some secret trails in the woods. And these trails are insanely steep, like really, really steep. And not only are they steep, they are over roots and tree roots and stuff like that. I mean, it's the sort of place you go, you think you really are afraid that if you fall, you're going to get seriously injured, right? And on top of that, you can be going at some quite hot, some speeds. So like between this, there is a very sensible, rational fear, which is of getting hurt, right? If you ride down this and you don't do it correctly, you're going to get hurt. But then often what I find is there are things that I know I can do it. I know I can do it. I know I can ride that. I know it's not something that I can't do, right? But I'm still afraid. And that fear is paralyzing. It just takes me, literally, sometimes it can take me 2 or 3 hours. I'll come to a single feature, like say some rocks that I want to go down, and I just can't do it. And it'll literally, I might have to spend 2 hours just, walking up and down it. And I might even go away and say, I'm not going to do it. I'll come back another time, but it's, so there's the thing, is that there is the thing that I know it's within my capability, right? It's not outside of my ability. It's not but you know, it's a sort of you know, obviously it's just the fear of getting hurt, right, and the fear of crashing and the fear of being injured, which is perfectly rational. But then there is this time when we know Abdul Haqq, right? And so this is the thing, is that there's the sensible fear, there's the absolute sensible fear that you should have, that Allah has put in us as part of our nature. And we all have that, because that fear is what helps keeps us away from harm. But then it's like every part of our nafs, fear is just another part of our nafs. It's just another part of our impulses, right? Of those natural impulses that are essentially good, just like everything, hunger, thirst, you know, love, hope, all of those things. Yeah. You know, they're all very good and very useful and essential for our survival. The problem comes in is when those things interrupt us and stop and preventing us from doing things that we know we should be doing and that we are perfectly capable of doing, but we are interrupted by fear, right? And that's the thing, is that dealing with that fear is actually a huge challenge. Right?
It is. It is.
Like
yeah.
I like, that's why I sort of wanted to sort of put this on pause, because I wanted to, I mean, obviously I've done quite a bit of reading around it, but I just needed to refresh myself to think about and to find out a little bit more about. Not so much my problem is not so much not being afraid, right? I'm actually quite highly motivated by fear. People may surprise you, but I'm probably way more motivated. I'm more driven by avoiding pain than I am, you know, going towards pleasure, right? I'm way more motivated by not wanting to go to hellfire than I am the delights of paradise. Yeah, like hell, you know, the punishment of hellfire, humiliation on the day of judgment, the suffering on the day of judgment, even in this life. Abdul Haqq, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but one of the things that has always motivated me for years, why, you know, that motivated me to go around driving around the country like we used to, giving dawah, like pushing ourselves. Like we did some crazy stuff, bro. We traveled some serious miles, right? You know, we'd be getting home 1 a.m. and then the next day we'd be driving off to another part of the country and doing that 3 or 4 days in a row. What pushed me was fear. I thought, if I don't push myself for the sake of Allah, Allah's going to put trials and tribulations upon me. So you know what? I don't want that. I want my life to be easy. So what I will do is I'll push myself for the sake of Allah, so Allah doesn't throw something on me, right? So I'm a person who's probably more motivated by fear than I am by. So that's not my problem. My big problem is not. I don't walk out of the house fearless. I'm absolutely, totally not a fearless person at all. I'm much more on the spectrum of, I sometimes really struggle to overcome my fears. I'm a person who really struggles. But I think, Abdul Haqq, maybe it'll be interesting to hear from you, because I have an inclination that you're probably on the other spectrum. You're probably more of a person, and I know from your past, I know the sort of person you were back in the days. So like, I imagine that, you know, maybe you can correct me, but I imagine that your attitude, you know, and the sort of people you're around, your attitude is a bit more fearless. You were a bit more like in your face and fearless and, yeah, just stuff it. I'm just going to go and do that sort of stuff. So like, you tell us how you handle walking out and the people you know, and that you must know people like that. How do you handle that? How do you handle that thing of just not being, and I'm not necessarily talking about taqwa here, right?
Right.
I'm just talking about being sensibly afraid of, you know, the consequences of your actions, right? And just ignoring them, and just, how do you temper that? How do you, you know, temper your fearlessness? Because that's a really good point, because being scared of stuff unnecessarily is bad, but being fearless when you should be afraid is also not really clever, is it?
No.
So
no,
how do you do
it? Really good question. I'm glad that you led into this with what you said, because as we said before, Abdurraheem, it's going to open up a whole lot of stuff, and you've given a beautiful example. yes, you're absolutely right. As you were saying what you were saying, I was saying to myself, wow, I'm really impressed with that. Allahumma barak, because the life that I come from and my friends come from, what we had to, the high level of stress that we faced every single day leaving our home sort of desensitized us. As I've said to you before, we felt we were being hunted by the society every time we heard a siren, every time we saw the police and everything. What they put us through, what they did to us in the cars, in the cells, and then threw us out uncharged or whatever. Being kidnapped at gunpoint, and I'm not going to go into too much here, okay? But it's not. But it desensitized us to such an extent that when we would get involved in things, the propensity for violence and harm, when I think back now, was alarming. It was
But didn't
alarming.
you ever think, I'm going to get hurt, I'm going to get killed, I'm going to get injured?
Because of the pain, harm, and injury that some of us had inflicted upon us as we were growing up through the lifestyle that was leading, the opposite happened. And that's why I can understand the gang mentality today. There was this this high level of testosterone and almost a frenzy to inflict
bravado, like
pain.
a pure bravado.
It went beyond bravado to inflict pain. Look, Abdurraheem, you didn't need to have anyone around you. I remember being so incensed that I'd leave my home with whatever weaponry I had, and I'm heading for people to do what I need to do, not caring if I suffer a fatality as a result, but just to get that feeling out onto the people that we were going towards, or I was going towards.
So you think it's anger? Do you think it's partly anger that overrides the fear impulse? Do you think
it is because
it's interesting, bro? Because one of the things, sorry to interrupt, because I want to get more from you, but it's really interesting. I've actually tried that as a technique. Yeah, I actually remember very, very clearly there was this one particular thing I was so determined to get down this particular hill, super steep hill, and I started shouting at myself and literally swearing at myself, and you know, like getting angry with myself as a technique, to overcome my fear. So I don't know. I can't even remember. I think it might have worked, but I'm not. I didn't feel it was the most constructive way of doing it. But sometimes that works. That just getting angry with yourself. So I don't know. Yeah. So maybe you can use anger to override it.
That's an interesting point, because I can't do that, and the friends and the communities that I come from, we can't, oh, let's get ourselves angry. Okay, it doesn't happen like that. Now, becoming a Muslim and learning more about Allah, and that's one of the things, I'll be honest with you, when the day I took my Shahada was preceded by a night sitting with my close brother Aslam, and he said, I'm going to the mosque the next day, and some of the younger lot had gone already a week before. And he asked me the question. He asked me that one question, and this was predicated on fear of Abdurraheem. And it was so it's Allah guides us, of course, but he was sitting in my home, playing music, drinking wine, whatever, relaxing. And he said, he said, I'm going to the mosque tomorrow to become a Muslim. I said, okay, good for you. We've been looking at it, we've been discussing everything. And he said, what about you? I was like, no. I believe in some of it, I believe in what I've been learning and everything, but no, not for me. I'm not ready yet. So he asked me this question, Abdurraheem, and this is what caused fear. Do you believe in the Day of Judgment? Like we all do, don't we? I said, yes, we do. Do you believe we're going to meet God one day and speak about what we did in the world? I said, yes, that's from the Christian belief, and I still hold that belief now. So he said to me, what are you going to say to God if you die tonight and on the Day of Judgment you're questioned about why you didn't follow the truth as you know it? I was angry, Abdurraheem. I was angry when he said that to me. But he's my closest friend. So he left that night. He said, going. I stayed seated. This was a Saturday night in March, second week of March. I stayed seated it was about 11:30. My wife came down the next morning at 11:45. I hadn't moved from my seat because I couldn't answer that question. I said to myself, and I was facing a court case, what had happened, a big court case. I could be going to jail and whatever, police framing and everything. I won the case, alhamdulillah, but I didn't know at that time. And I thought to myself, one, you could be going to jail, but two, if you die and you know this is the truth, what am I going to say to Allah? So my wife came down, she saw, she didn't speak to me, she left me to do. I went upstairs, showered, didn't drive down to the mosque. I didn't know where mosque was. I was told about Brixton Mosque, a new mosque. This is the directions. Jumped on the bus, and you know the story. I went and I kept thinking to myself, because friends had died. You know, friends have since died. Some violently. Some, do you understand what I'm saying? Some found in their home after weeks, just dead. And I just thought, I can't let that happen to me. I have to have submitted to Allah. So that fear that drove me to become a Muslim. I then started learning about fear, love, hope, trust in Allah. And you know what, Abdurraheem, for someone who, you would know what I'm speaking about in this regard, for someone who was not a Muslim before, to understand these concepts and to continue to be driven by them. And I'll stop at this point, but you said the fear of the hellfire. And conversely, I'm not driven by that. I'm driven by wanting to see he who I gave up all the things that I gave up for, and who's guided and blessed me in this life. I'm driven by wanting to meet and be with Allah above all. Not even paradise with family, friends, and all the trappings of paradise, which we all want, mashallah. I want to meet him.
Yeah.
Inshallah.
Well, okay. I mean, I think, you know, when I say I'm primarily driven by fear, I don't mean that other things don't, you know, I'm not saying that other things don't influence me as well, but I would say primarily, you know, that's my primary, you know, like fear motivates me probably more than other stuff, you know, but I mean, I sort of wanted to go back to why is that? I'm just thinking more from a psychological perspective, right? Obviously, we have an innate, you know, we have our fitra, we have our innate sort of being, yeah, that on some level must recognize these realities about Allah, about judgment, about the consequences. And like, I guess the fact that the day of judgment is inescapable, right? It's absolutely inescapable. There is no escape on that day. There's no escaping that accountability. Whereas if you're going to go and you're going to grab your gun, or you're going to grab whatever it is you're going to grab, yeah, your baseball bat, and you're going to flip in, take out some, you know, rival gang members who've dissed you, or whatever it may be, yeah, okay, whatever we do, yeah, so then, you know, there is that still that sort of, yeah, you know, well, I've survived these things before. You understand what I'm saying, right? And I guess there's that sort of cognitive dissonance where you think that because you survived it 10 times, you're going to survive it 11 times. Whereas in fact, it's probably the opposite, right? If you survived it 10 times, the likelihood of the 11th time being the time you're going to get done is actually more likely, not less. Obviously, unless you have incredible fighting skills, that, you know, that's a whole different thing, right? But I mean, so I think because we keep going back, obviously you keep going back to, which is good, you keep going back to the fear of Allah, the day of judgment, but I'm just trying to, you know, pin down like a less spiritual reasons, and the whole concept of fear from a slightly less spiritual dimension, because that's what sort of what I'm interested in is, why are people fearless, right? Why, like, so we ask this, we say this, fear don't leave home without it, but who are these people who walk out of their home and they're just not afraid? That we've met them, you know, we definitely, you know, people who just don't have that same level of fear, right? Like I have a son who's a bit like that. He was like that when he was a kid, right? He would just go to the top, you know, he would go to the top of the, you know, the sofa. He was just this little 3-year-old thing, and he'd just leap off the top of it. And it's like, what on earth? And you find these people, right, who do this stuff, and it's not just them about them being adrenaline junkies. Yeah, there's, yeah, they're adrenaline junkies, they're addicted to adrenaline. No, there is a whole different dimension of, they just don't have the same type of fear that the rest of us have, right? They just have a different level of, they have a different appetite for danger.
Right.
they have a different, you know, I don't know what it is. And I think that goes back to why we were having this talk, is maybe those are not good people to be around, because they can get you in trouble. Because, you know, if you hang out with people like that, more or less, they're probably going to encourage you to do some of that crazy stuff. And then you're going to get in trouble. So what is it? Why do you think some people are like that, Abdul? Why do you think some people have that?
Right. I think it is fascinating why there's that.
I mean, and we need people like that, right? Who's going to push boundaries? Who's going to get human beings to do crazy stuff that we never thought of? I often, sorry to interrupt, bro.
No, go on.
Sorry, typical. You know what? I think, do you ever think about those people, our ancestors, yeah, who got in these dugout canoes? Yeah, you know, these canoes, they dug them out of a log, and they flipping traveled over the oceans for hundreds of miles, thousands of miles. Yeah. They went from ultimately from Africa to, I don't know, Australia to wherever, across the oceans in some whatever. Like, doesn't it take some sort of level of just sheer courage? Yeah. And, you know, like some abandonment of fear to be able to do that. So, like, I
agree.
We need people like that as well. Maybe we just need some people to be like that, bro.
No, so what you're saying, I think there's a tempering of that. Absolutely right. Courage. You mentioned that term, courage. Courage is required, and courage also is to temper and control that fear. Okay, bravery. The brave person, those individuals that you're discussing, they may have elements of fear, but they've been able to control it. Or the sense of purpose or sense of adventure even overrides that fear. That purpose means that it will drive them to explore, will drive them to achieve. When we look at the companions and we see the odds that they faced, when we look at Musa alayhi salam, when he had Bani Israel hot on the tail of the Pharaoh and his army, hot on the tail of Bani Israel, and Allah parted the sea. We need to consider, imagine that for the moment, that the sea was parted like mountains when it was previously just a tempestuous water. And because of the faith, the courage and faith to walk through that. Abdurraheem, you and me now would be pausing like, I'm not doing that. This was once the huge river. I'm not going to walk through that. And then we see what happened to Pharaoh. We see the story in Surah Yunus.
Well, it's interesting. Sorry you brought that story. I've got to interrupt. Like, look at Pharaoh. He doesn't stop. He just like keeps going. Like, how does that make sense, bro? Yeah, I always think about that.
That's a good point.
He's so arrogant. Yeah?
Exactly. But Abdurraheem, that's a really good example. The arrogance, that's sometimes what numbs that fear. Okay, that haughtiness, that numbs that fear. The blindness, that numbs that fear. But what happened at the end? We see, if you look in the 90th ayah of Surah Yunus, where when the waves started coming back down, he says, I believe in of Harun. And Allah says, now you believe? Now that fear has hit him at that point. So the individuals who are masking their fear or are subduing fear or have an absence of fear for whatever reasons are there, we know from that story that there will come a point, as you've said, Yawmul Qiyamah, because you're not going to have anyone standing there like a bad man, like, yeah, what's happening to, no one, not a single aspect of creation is going to be able to stand there haughty, proud, or not caring at that point. The fears that they may have subdued, the fear that might have been absent cognitively is going to be so intense that day. As we know, the sweat is going to be at different levels when we're standing there before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But coming back to another point, Abdurraheem, because I think it's fascinating what you've said. We see that fear can be subdued by society. So Brother Bilal gave an example of what happened with one of his children today. He was explaining there where he's been told that his daughter is now terrified of witches because of what he's been telling her from a religious perspective. But she's been asking which is true. Why? Because we have Harry Potter, everything. Look at those stories of Harry Potter, Abdurraheem. Look at the what has been put across movies today. Things that when we were younger were 18 plus and whatever. Let's look at how the desensitization has taken place to such an extent that young children could be looking at these grotesque images, monsters and everything like that, and being told this is entertainment, this is fun. Look,
well, this is shaitan, bro. This is part of shaitan.
No,
Shaitan wants you to make you afraid of something that is just not even supposed to be afraid of.
Right, but so what's happening there, though? There's no longer fear in that instance. Abdurraheem, when we look at, let's look at, I'm not advocating anyone watches it. Let's look at what's been billed as one of the top 10 scariest movies of all time, because we knew there was some elements of truth underlying it. The Exorcist. Okay, The Exorcist. When we were younger, we were like, yeah, we're going to watch this movie. We're going to watch this movie. I remember watching the movie.
Yeah.
I remember being traumatized by what I saw. And when I became a Muslim, understanding what had happened.
I was laughing when I saw that film, bro.
Were you high?
No.
Allah. Okay.
I did not find it frightening at all, bro.
How old were you when you watched?
I did not find it, bro. All I could see was the fakeness of it. You know what I mean? I mean, honestly, bro, all I could see is this is so fake, yeah, and this is so ridiculous, yeah. I don't know why, bro. I've seen bits of it since then, and I found it more scary now. I don't know why.
And I find it less scary now. But see, Abdurraheem, you see the perceptions there, but it's again, this is really interesting.
Scary movies don't scare me. They really don't.
No, likewise. Yeah. So my thing is that we need to understand the fear that we are being told to have.
Yeah.
And juxtapose that with the fear that we should have. And at the same time, we've got to be careful. Bilal's brought a really good point, and I'm sure that he doesn't do this with his children. And we know this used to happen when we were younger as Muslims. Everything to our children was, if you don't do this, the hellfire, the hellfire, the hellfire, the hellfire. That's not a good look. That is not the way to nurture our children. And we shouldn't be nurturing them in that particular way, because either we desensitize them in one way, or they become scared of the whole deen and what they see in this instance. So the balance of the fear that we should have, and it's not only a fear of Allah, but as you said, there are natural fears that we can have. A fear of spiders, you can't help that if that's something that's there. There may be other things. There's some who have that fear of stepping out of the home and going out of the home and everything. But then tempering that type of fear is building in your trust in Allah.
But there's some people, bro, that are paralyzed by irrational fears. You know,
you're right.
Like, I don't know, but you must know some people, or you know of people who have extreme anxiety, social anxiety, for example, right? A lot of people are paralyzed by, the fear of speaking in public, or all sorts of things that are not only normal activities, but they're almost essential activities for, living your daily life, right? So, I mean, fear is this funny thing. And like I said, I think this is something I want to look into more. I mean, I think there's this book that I've ordered now, so maybe next week we can talk about it. It's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And I haven't read it, but I've heard about it. I've been told it's one of the best self-help books out there. But I think the point is, and I remember, I don't know if you know Muhammad Arshad, but he was telling me about this book ages ago. And it's sort of basically, the summary of it is that fear is natural. It's there for a good reason to warn you. And it's like, with a lot of these things, it's sort of like you have to acknowledge it. You have to sort of almost say, yes, fear is good. Fear is healthy. I've assessed the situation. I've assessed the risk level, right? And I've decided that we need to do this and not be afraid of it. And it's like, feel the fear, accept it, but go ahead and do what you have to do, because, I think that's the thing. And I think it comes back to, I think what it comes back to is a very important thing, and that is really controlling your impulses. Like, fear is just another one of those impulses, just like your sexual impulses, just like your impulse to eat food. I mean, that's a key component of what being a Muslim is all about. And that is impulse control. And fear is just another one of those impulses that it's good, it's there for a reason, but you have to regulate it. And, you know, you have to use your mind, your prefrontal cortex. You have to allow that to operate, and for you to assess the situation, acknowledging the reality that fear is there for a reason. It's a good thing. Yeah.
Right.
But you have the brain, you have the mind, you can figure out, you can think about whether this is really something that you should be afraid of or not. I guess a lot of it is just cultivating that ability to do that. The thing is, there's so many things that can override it, which again goes back to the whole theme why you started this, you know, fear, don't leave home without it, which reminds me of, you know, again, the problem is if you're hanging out with people who are going to encourage you to do things that you're afraid of doing for good reasons, and you know you shouldn't be doing, but guess what, right? One of the things that, you know, will help you override your fear is being with people who are not afraid of that thing. Now, that could be good and that could be bad.
Right.
Because if there's something you want to achieve, they'll help you achieve it. But if there's something wrong that you're going to do, or something that is beyond your capabilities, yeah, it may be a good thing, but it's outside of your capabilities. Guess what? You're going to end up getting hurt, most probably.
Or Abdurraheem, the individuals that you're with want you to do this thing. This happens in peer group pressures, gangs, and then you not doing that. The amount of terror that they place on you is far worse than you having gone and done the thing that they wanted you to do. And this brings me to the next.
You see it in 100 different movies and, you know, whatever.
Exactly.
You're sitting there going, no, don't do it. Don't listen to them. You know, it's like, oh, you can do it.
That's right.
You know something bad's
Exactly.
gonna happen, right?
And Abdurraheem, that brings me up. Before I move on to the next point, what you're saying is there's a quote here that I shared with the group, you and me, earlier on. Travel in the direction of your fear. Do what scares you, and you will live the kind of life others missed. Yeah.
To be honest, I like the sound of that, because I'm a real believer in pushing your boundaries, bro.
Right.
Like in a very controlled way, but I am not impressed with people who just stay in their comfort zone, bro.
Yeah.
You cannot stay in your comfort zone. You got to push yourself, right? Yeah. And like, you've got to do it. I love that. I actually love that, bro. And I do think we have to be pushing the edge of our fears, not taqwa, not the fears that you said, the fear of Allah. Like, the more of that you can have, the better.
Right.
But as long as it's balanced with love of Allah and also hope in His mercy, because you know that if all you have is fear, you become an extremist, right? That's the Khawarij, you know.
Or love. If you have an extreme of any of them, you go to extreme. So you're absolutely right. You can't just, I'm just going to fear Allah. Where Allah's given us this life. Yes, there were the hadith there, the narrations, it's the prison of the believer. He's given us this life to really utilize all of our senses, to experience the beauty of living in this world before we go to the next. So I agree with you. I agree with you in that sense that fear shouldn't be the predominant characteristic of our existence. But as the title of the topic, it shouldn't be totally absent either. But it still comes back to the fascination with, why are there some individuals who are totally fearless? There's one aspect as well. There are people that are totally evil. Abdurraheem, one day when we're off scene and I'm with you and we're talking, I knew and had in the circles I was with, not my immediate circle, I knew some very evil people, and I cannot even speak about some of the things that we knew they were doing. You know, so
there's some people who have no shame, bro, as well as the Prophet. You know, the Prophet said, you know, if you have no shame, you're gonna do whatever you like. So like shame as well, like all of these aspects of our nafs, right? Shame is another one of those things, right?
It's an aspect of fear. Shame is an aspect of fear.
It is. You're right. It is. I think that's a very interesting. See, this is a whole nother topic. The whole topic of shame, and like, I must admit, you know, one of the things, again, you know, we keep going back to the Day of Judgment and the fear of Allah, and like, interestingly, like, one of the things that really shook me up, when I read the Quran, about the Day of Judgment was the fact that Allah will humiliate people in front of the whole of humanity.
Yeah, subhanAllah.
Can you imagine your sins being exposed in front of every single human being? Your mum, your dad, your brothers, your sister, your kids, right? Your sins being exposed in front of can you imagine the shame? Can you imagine the humiliation? Can you imagine, you know, like the embarrassment, so you're right. Shame, right, is linked to fear, right? Shame is linked to fear. But a lot of people say, well, shame is not a good thing. But it's like all of those things. Fear is good in the right, when it's, you know, in the right proportion.
Right.
Shame is good in the right proportion, right? Everything is good as long as it's not taken to an excess, right? All of these things, when they become excessive, fear included, it becomes really, really problematic. And they're all problematic if you lose them altogether, right? If you lose any type of fear, it's going to be problematic. It's inevitable. You're going to get in danger, right?
Exactly. And the opposite of shame is bashfulness. And
shyness,
shyness. So that characteristic.
No, shame is not. I don't think shame is quite the opposite of bashfulness. You know, like I think it's very similar. Shame and bashfulness are very, very similar. You know, they're linked emotions. They're sort of shyness. Shyness is also probably linked to, you know, the desire not to be seen to be bad, bad in front of people. Right. But it has a good quality because you don't want to be seen to be bad, right? So the Prophet said shyness is all good. And generally, if you're shy in front of people, you'll also be shy in front of Allah. You'll be shy to disobey Allah. You'll be shy to, you know, transgress his limits, inshallah. Hopefully you will, right? And the sense of shame is that feeling of guilt, isn't it? About I did something wrong. Right. And again, that's good. If you feel shame that you've disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's not a bad thing. If you feel shame that you've dishonored people and abused them, is that a bad thing? No, it's good. Why should you not feel shame?
Right. That's right. And that as you've said, that shame, if you remove that shame and you do as you wish, that day when everything's exposed. Today, many of us are concerned with being exposed in this life. And Allah can cause that. You see, when we look at the media, it's all about scandal. It's all about exposure. We see it's followed us as Muslims as well. We're all into that. And did you hear about this brother and what this sister said? And it's all about that because we know that it's a very serious characteristic. But if, as you said, if we have shame, there's that element of caution. There's that element of conscientiousness as well. That's really important. So, Abdurraheem, I think you said to me, why do you want to do this topic? You can see how much we've discussed already.
There's a lot of stuff to go through. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. But inshallah, next week I'm gonna, if by next week I might see if I can at least flick through this book, and because I think let's see what it has to say, and if there's anything useful for us, maybe there isn't. We'll decide like to talk about something else.
Yeah.
But I think there's more mileage in this topic, especially I think it would be great to present people with some, you know, I first of all, I'd be really interested to hear from anyone who's listening out there right now. Yeah. What do you find a challenge? Are you one of those people who just not really afraid of anything that much? Right. I would love to hear from you, and, you know, you tell us like, you know, what is going on there. I think if you're like most of us or a lot of us, maybe you struggle to overcome your fears, and that actually fear is holding you back from doing a lot of things that you would love to do. Why don't you tell us about that? I would be very interested to hear. Send us a comment, send us a little message. Just tell us what it is. Yeah. And let's see if next week, inshallah, we can go through some things that might help all of us to deal with those things, inshallah. What do you think about that, bro? Does that sound like good?
I think that's excellent. And I think if we can help steer each other towards the right type of fear or fears to leave home with, without being cowed or stupefied, or not stupefied, it's not the word, frozen by our fears, overcoming them, as you've said, I think that would be very, very good.
But I think, you know, I think the taqwa is such a healthy fear, because actually taqwa, if you have that fear of Allah, right, then you'll be afraid not to do the things that you're afraid of, right? And like you said that already. It's like you talked about that, about your past, and sometimes you're more afraid of the humiliation you will get in front of your peers than you are of doing whatever it is. And I guess it's that same essential motivation, which is really interesting about human beings, how important other people's opinions of us is. And of course, as a Muslim, the most important is what Allah is thinking about you. What is Allah's opinion of you? How Allah is going to judge you, right? You know, that's the most important thing. And I think I'm sure that is a very, very healthy type of fear to have, because it is going to drive you always to excellence, inshallah. And then anyway, Habibi, I think we should wrap it up. If you got, I've said my concluding remarks.
No, I'm going to conclude. I just want to address one of the brothers, Abdullah, Chris Love, I think, mentioned that he has social anxiety, a lot of social anxiety of not being good enough. I think next week we talk about that, because there are many who have that. With mental health problems come in because of predicated by a number of fears and doubt about one's own ability in that instance. And I think we've got Iron Mike, who's come through, and the name Iron Mike says it all, that he has no fear except of Allah. So maybe we can have Iron Mike put in some suggestions to help others like Abdullah how to overcome. So this is really important. He's saying like lions, fear of lions attacking you. Yes, Iron Mike agreed completely. So we can have you next week, Iron Mike, and all of the brothers, sisters, those who are interested in contributing and sharing. How can we inculcate the correct fear, and not just the fear of Allah? We have some natural fears, as Abdurraheem has expounded upon today, and all we need to do is discuss them and say, well, okay, how do we address those? So when we step out, hopefully when you step out tomorrow or you step out on Monday, you'll be thinking, okay, first and foremost, my fear of Allah, my trust in Allah is all there, and la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Nothing can happen to me or anyone that I love unless Allah decreed it, and it would have been decreed 50,000 years before the creation of the heavens and the earth. So if we have that confidence, that is a step in the right direction. Those are my parting words, and I'm going to read that quote again that Abdurraheem liked. I know Hassan liked.
I love it.
Travel in the direction of your fear. Fear Allah. We're going in that direction. We're going to meet him one day. Do what scares you, and you will live the kind of life others missed. And many are missing so much of life today, brothers and sisters, because they are trapped. They are imprisoned by their fears, and they're not going out and on the trails like Abdurraheem is doing, or doing these not extreme sports, as it were, but stepping over the boundary, trusting Allah in Allah when you do. And the fear of talking, my Yusuf Salihah, don't worry. You've seen two individuals here who can't stop half the time. So inshallah, we will be.
Bro, people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of death.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Most people are more of, there you go.
You know what? Quickly, I'll share with you. Every time I think it's healthy. You won't think so, I know, and I wonder if you have that. Every time I stand up to do a khutbah, every time I go to do a public speech, I have a degree of fear. And I call upon Allah more at that particular point, because I want to deliver the speech, whether it's a religious, obviously a sermon, or it's a public speaking in the field that I'm in. I have fear. And you know what? I like having that fear, because it centers.
It's good. It centers you, MashaAllah. Alhamdulillah, bro. Jazakallah khair for that, bro. It's been a pleasure. As you, it's another one we could be talking a long time about this, but we're going to leave something for next week, inshallah.
Definitely.
And until then, brothers and sisters, from me, Abdurraheem, and it's Assalamu alaikum from me, and
it's Assalamu alaikum from me.
All right.
See you next week, inshallah. Wa alaikum assalam.